Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. Looking for a movie that celebrates the gift of life? Get ready for Lifemark, the new movie from the Kendrick brothers and Kirk Cameron, opening in theaters everywhere September 9th. In Lifemark, David's uncomfortable world is turned upside down when his birth mother unexpectedly reaches out to him, longing to meet the 18-year-old son she's only held once. With the encouragement of his adopted parents, David embarks on a life-altering journey of discovery that leads to a staggering truth from his past. Inspired by a true story, Lifemark is a powerful reminder that one decision, one choice, can impact so much more than one life. Lifemark is pro-family, pro-love, pro-forgiveness, pro-reconciliation, and pro-new beginnings. So if you are too, make your plans to see Lifemark. See Lifemark in theaters nationwide beginning September 9th. So to learn more about Lifemark and get your tickets today at lifemarkmovie.com. That's lifemarkmovie.com.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and as we do on this show, we always talk about things related to the Constitution and fair interpretation, and why, even though something may seem like a good idea, the Constitution actually prohibits it for an even better reason. And here to break it down with me is my good friend Hans von Spakovsky, and he wrote a piece in the Daily Signal, I believe it was, why Tennessee's new residency requirement for congressional candidates is blatantly unconstitutional. So Hans, thanks so much for joining me.
Sure, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so, this has been an interesting race, and obviously the Heritage Foundation does not endorse candidates, so this is only a question of the constitutionality of this new requirement for residency. Right. But it seems to be very targeted against Morgan Ortagus, who's one candidate who would be off the ballot if this law went through. And of course, this is a highly contested race in Tennessee 5. I've had Robbie Starbuck on this show. But break down what the legislature is trying to do with this bill and why it's unconstitutional.
Well, yeah, I think it was connected to her candidacy because all of a sudden the Tennessee legislature said, well, if you want to run as a congressional candidate in a primary in this state, you have to have lived here for 3 years. The problem with that is that they can't do that. And the reason is that the U.S. Supreme Court has said quite properly that, remember, the Constitution sets up 3 requirements to be a member of the House of Representatives. You have to be a certain age, you have to be a citizen in the United States, and you do have to be a resident of the state at the time you are elected. But not that long ago, remember, states were trying to put in term limits for members of Congress. That went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. What the Supreme Court said was, look, those 3 qualifications in the Constitution to be a member of the House, That's all that is allowed. No state can impose more qualifications. And if you want to put in term limits, which some people think is a good idea, you have to amend the Constitution. So putting in a residency requirement like this, the state simply can't do it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, about this dynamic is that there's some pushback, of course, saying that, well, these are the minimum qualifications that are in the Constitution. And so if we tried to allow, for example, a non-residency requirement, that would go against the Constitution, but the Constitution doesn't textually prohibit the states from enacting other requirements in addition. That's not what the Supreme Court said, and I think that's the accurate interpretation, that it's not just the minimum requirements. But why does that argument, in your opinion, fail?
Well, I think it fails because if you look at the decision, it's U.S. term limits versus Thornton. Look, the Supreme Court goes through in great detail looking at the history of the development of these qualifications. And it's very clear that Congress did not want state governments, and they also didn't want Congress to have the power to put in additional qualifications. Why? Well, because they feared that, for example, Congress might put in qualifications that would ensure that incumbents can stay in office and make it more difficult for challengers. That's exactly here what Tennessee is doing it. They're trying to limit the people who can run for Congress. So the Supreme Court decision, I think, is very clear on this. I think it's the right decision on it, and Tennessee can't do this. Keep in mind, Jenna, that Tennessee actually used to have the same kind of residency requirement if you wanted to vote in the state. If you wanted to vote in a presidential election, you had to have lived there for a year. A newly hired professor at the law school at Vanderbilt, who, by the way, was my constitutional law professor when I went to Vanderbilt, he sued and took that case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, you can't do that. You can't have a one-year residency requirement before you allow people to vote. And this is a similar requirement.
Yeah, and it was also a similar requirement, just adding to the qualifications for president that we remember that California was trying to institute for tax purposes, and saying you have to have tax disclosures because they were trying to object to President Trump not releasing his tax returns. And so there are so many different political reasons why the states might be trying to keep candidates off of ballots for other reasons than just letting the voters decide. And so what do you think about this new part in the Tennessee GOP now that is trying to prohibit actually, I think it's 3 or 4 candidates, including Robbie Starbuck, Morgan Ortagus, and others, from being on the ballot simply because they objected to them being actual Republicans. And so it's more of a private party control rather than some other analysis and saying, you can't be a Republican. In my view, that's party control and letting the voters not decide, and saying, the voters should be able to elect and vote for whoever they want. But do you think that that's a different analysis, and what is the likelihood of success for a potential lawsuit that Robbie Starbuck says that he's going to file?
Right. That is a different analysis because, the first law we were talking about was passed by the state legislature. What you're now talking about is a rule that apparently the Republican Party has. But keep in mind that the law on this is very complicated. And the cases most relevant to this took place during the Civil Rights era. Because remember, during the Civil Rights era, the Democratic Party in the South tried to, for example, put in white-only primaries to prevent African Americans from being able to run for their Democratic Party nominations. And what the courts said about that was that under those kind of circumstances, political parties become state actors. In other words, they become like the state governments, particularly when the state governments have a hand in determining the rules under which a primary runs. And in those potential cases, when they become a state actor, there's a limit on what they can do. And that limit, by the way, includes discriminatory conduct. I would think, actually, they might have a pretty good case saying that this discriminates against individuals moving in from out of state. And as you know, the courts have long looked down with disfavor on those kind of rules.
Yeah, and also just changing parties, or also just not even participating. And so Robbie Starbucks is the case that I'm the most familiar with in terms of the facts related to this particular one. But apparently the objection there, or at least one of them, is that he didn't vote in enough Republican primaries to prove himself as a Republican sufficient for the party rules. And it seems like, especially in 2022, when you have so many different people that are saying, maybe I've never been involved in civics and government before,
Right.
but I'm seeing what's going on in this country. I want to jump in and run. And as a citizen and meeting all of the actual rule of law qualifications, this is my party and this is how I'm running. And so it seems, just from a fundamental fairness standpoint, and from a we the people get to select and prefer our leaders, and who ends up in elected office, it seems to make sense that the party shouldn't prohibit them under this analysis of, well, you're not really a true Republican.
Yeah, no, I think that's the right way to look at this. I think you ought to let the grassroots folks decide whether they think somebody's really Republican. You and I could easily cite all kinds of folks that we know who are in the upper reaches of certain party organizations in certain states who we might not consider to be real conservatives. And I'm always one for letting the grassroots make the final decisions.
Yes, and and that's what campaigns are for, and that's
Right.
why getting out the vote matters, and that's why people making sure to exercise their constitutionally protected right to vote is so important. And in that vein as well, I wanted to ask you about the status of election integrity. You and I are both part of a coalition of allies in Washington, D.C., and actually around the country that are very concerned about election integrity issues. I was at an event with you and President Trump, who had you stand up and recognized you as one of the foremost, most knowledgeable attorneys on this issue in the country, and I think he's absolutely right on that. So in terms of your analysis of where the country is situated coming into 2022, what are the issues that you think are the most important? And has there been any progress, in your opinion, between some of the things that we saw in 2020 that ultimately were violations of the rule of law versus how we're moving forward now into the midterms?
Well, look, I think we are in a much improved position in particular states. As you probably are aware, about 24 states actually have passed significant reforms to improve their election process. And this includes states like Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Georgia and Texas, for example, put in ID requirements for absentee ballots, something that every state ought to do. The problem right now is that there is a fierce litigation fight going on. All these liberal, frankly radical groups have sued these states. They've sued Florida, they've sued Georgia, they've sued Texas, and other states, along with their ally, the Merrick Garland Justice Department. And so these states are in the midst of a fight to preserve these election reforms. Florida, unfortunately, recently got really one of the worst written decisions I've ever seen from a very liberal federal judge, throwing out many of their election reforms. Now, hopefully that will get overturned on appeal, but this fight is going on right now as we are talking, and I expect it to continue through the date of the November election.
Yeah, and isn't it so sad that this type of lawfare is
Yes.
how the parties, and especially I would consider the Democrats, are the ones who are trying to do this and bend the rules and have so many other things that are not, according to state law, are not constitutional, and yet they don't just want to run candidates that they think are going to appeal to the majority of the voters. And it reminds me as well of what's going on with so many of the candidates like Marjorie Taylor Green and Madison Cawthorn, and even Doug Mastriano is running for governor of Pennsylvania. And these challenges to say that based on the 14th Amendment and participation in a quote-unquote insurrection, even though none of them have been convicted of that in a court of law, and yet there are leftist organizations that are coming after them trying to say you're not qualified for office. It's totally a legal pretext. And so,
It is.
And what's your opinion on those suits?
Well, in fact, I recently wrote a extensive heritage paper on that, going through the constitutional history And those are frivolous, meritless claims. Those challenges saying that these members of Congress should not be allowed to be on the ballot because of a certain provision in the 14th Amendment. Just last Friday, a state court in Arizona threw out a lawsuit just like this that was filed against Andy Biggs and Paul Gosar. And the only case really that where a judge has ruled the wrong way is in Georgia, where Amy Totenberg, who happens to be the sister of Nina Totenberg, the very liberal NPR correspondent, recently allowed a challenge to go forward based on this when she should have enjoined it. The Supreme Court and court decisions on this are actually very clear that these challenges have no legal merit. But it's lawfare. It's lawfare, like you said.
Yes, and I totally agree with you, and that's a great article, and everyone should go and read that, even if you think, oh, maybe it's it's more than a couple of paragraphs like an average news story. You'll actually learn something, and there are experts like Hans who go through the analysis so that you can be better equipped to understand the Constitution, understand how the law works on these things. And one of the main questions that I got from my viewers is, why didn't, in your opinion, Marjorie Taylor Green challenge that earlier and refuse to testify? I think a lot of people were surprised that she actually sat for testimony. Did that surprise you?
Well, it did. Look, I don't want to second guess her legal team because they did end up, unfortunately, before a bad judge, yeah. a judge I don't consider to be a good judge. But I think that case was ripe for an immediate motion for summary judgment or a motion to dismiss, which in legal terms means you're basically saying that they have no case and it shouldn't go forward at all. There should be no hearing. There should be no depositions, no discovery. That's certainly what happened in the North Carolina case with Matthew Cawthorn. He actually got an injunction throwing out his case. That's what happened in the Arizona decision. Unfortunately, they got a bad decision in Georgia, so she's going to have to continue to fight it. Ultimately, she will win, though.
Yes, and I think it's so frustrating to so many Americans who see that there is this disparate holding just based on the political nature of the appointment of the judge. And that's what so many people find so frustrating about the judicial branch, is this type of activism. And so how confident are you in the judicial merit of I think that one of President Trump's greatest accomplishments and most lasting legacies is going to be how many judges he put on the federal bench. But if you look at the state level and some of the state courts that are now adjudicating some of the state level issues, and certainly a lot of these issues on election integrity, do you think that there is more hope moving forward that judges are going to hold properly within the context and scope of originalism and the correct interpretation of the Constitution on the state level? Or where do you think we sit coming into 2022?
Well, I think there is a real look, I agree with you on President Trump's legacy with the federal courts. He appointed some of the best nominees we've ever had as federal judges. At the state courts, I'm frankly a lot more worried. The liberal left realized some years ago that if they couldn't get what they wanted through the federal courts, their alternative were state courts. And so they started running candidates for office in places like Pennsylvania and North Carolina, for example, where judges are elected, who are, frankly, left-wing ideologues. And they were very successful. Conservatives really have neglected the state courts. And so we've gotten bad decisions on election issues recently in places like North Carolina. We just got a bad decision in Kansas. That's an area where we need to pay a lot more attention to it. And frankly, we need to be sure that we're getting good judges into these state court positions. Frankly, folks like the judges that President Trump appointed.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of people, it seems like this is so frustrating, and that conservatives and protecting and preserving liberty, not some kind of partisanship, it seems like we're always playing catch up, and we're always on the defensive instead of finally going offensive. And so, there's been a lot of recent discussions about the future of conservatism and the Constitution, and whether we still have a rule of law, in the wake of 2020 and the disaster of that election. As an attorney who deals with so much of this, what's your thought on the future of conservatism and the Constitution? Can we continue to preserve and protect our great country? And what's your outlook? I know that's a really broad question.
Look, there are a lot of bad things going on, but I'm actually optimistic. And I'm optimistic because the public, from what I've seen, really is finally realizing and seeing the problems. I mean, just take the example of election integrity. Look, Jenna, I've been working on that issue for a long time. And before the 2020 election, it was very tough to get legislators and the general public, folks at the grassroots, interested in that topic. The only good thing that I can say that came out of the 2020 election is that folks suddenly realized, this is really important. We have to make sure our elections are secure. And that's why we've gotten more reforms passed in the last 2 years than in all the prior time that I was working on this issue. So I'm actually optimistic. Yeah, we have a lot of issues and we have a lot of fights ahead of us, but people are really now actively engaged in this. I mean, just look at what's happened at school boards, local school boards all over the country. The left is just so scared because parents have suddenly started showing up at school board meetings, challenging them in school board races, and questioning the kind of propaganda that is being fed to their children.
Yeah, and that is such an encouragement, and I'm optimistic as well that people across the country are no longer just turning a blind eye and saying, well, I don't need to wade into politics, it's too dirty. They now have this understanding that preserving and protecting liberty requires every citizen to be actively engaged and actively making a difference where they can, and holding our system accountable and making sure that we are participating, whether it's running for office, whether it's lobbying the legislature, whether it's going and being a poll watcher, whether it's just exercising your right to vote. I mean, all of these things matter. And so to see this great awakening of people who understand that we have to continue to preserve and protect liberty through participation and active citizenship, I think is really encouraging. And seeing that kind of fire and the brush fires of the grassroots has been really encouraging. As I've traveled the country over the last couple of years, and seeing the differences all across the country of people who are not just angry about the state of the country, but they're actually excited to do something about it in a positive way. And I think that's a really good thing. So in just the last few minutes I have with you, Hans, what would you suggest to people, and what does the Heritage Foundation suggest in terms of people who want to be actively engaged citizens, obviously voting, but if they're really concerned about election integrity, what is the best way that they can get involved and actually make a difference instead of just, saying, well, I just, all I can do is respond on Twitter?
Well, in addition to what you were talking about, which is voting, being poll watchers, actually getting jobs as poll workers in polling places. Look, the other thing they should start doing is the same way parents have been showing up suddenly at county school board meetings, people should show up at county election board meetings, because there are election boards in almost every county. They're the ones that run elections. People need to start showing up at those meetings and asking questions. They need to also be talking to their local state legislator, the person who represents them, about the improvements that need to be made in their states. Are you in a state that doesn't have an ID law? Well, you should be talking to your state legislators. Why haven't they put one in? Are you a state that allows what the left likes to call vote harvesting, what we call vote trafficking? In other words, they allow anybody to show up and pick up an absentee ballot? Talk to your legislators. They ought to be banning that and not allowing it, because it's an easy recipe for fraud. Those are the kind of things they ought to be doing.
Yeah, I like that term, ballot trafficking. I think that's much more on the nose than, because harvesting almost sounds like a good thing.
Exactly.
We think of Thanksgiving and the harvest, but trafficking, that's always a negative. So that's a much better term that I think we need to start using. Is the left weaponizes language so much, we need to be more precise in our terms. And
Right.
That's one of the things I love about reading all of your pieces, is that you're so precise in the way you articulate all of these terms and these issues in a way that's very comprehensible. It's easy to understand, but it's very precise. And the thing that you said as well about people actually being engaged in going to their local board of electors meetings and all of these things,
Right.
and holding them accountable. It's interesting. Politico actually said that in a piece, and I was surprised. I was like, this is Politico, but they're saying the people who are going to administer the 2024 presidential election are on your ballot in 2022. I mean, that's true
Right.
for Arizona with Mark Fincham, who's running for Secretary of State, in his case as well for being a quote-unquote insurrectionist. That was dismissed in Arizona as well. And Doug Mastriano is running for governor in Pennsylvania. He would get to appoint a Secretary of State. And so, there are all of these different offices that people are finally starting to pay attention to that they really didn't look at until they became problematic, where the left, unfortunately, tends to be sometimes more strategic, where we're too much playing defensive. So defensive posture. So I hope that people will get more engaged, continue those brush fires of liberty. And where can people follow you, find all of your articles, Hans, and continue to be well equipped by all of your materials?
Sure. They go to heritage.org, heritage.org. We have a whole page there on election integrity, and there's a lot of information there that can help folks.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And
Sure.
It's always great to talk with you. And I learned so much from you as well. And so thank you so much for all of the work that you do.
Thanks for having me.
Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So, for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support MyPillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.